The overhead light of the bar had been particularly unforgiving, bouncing off the polished mahogany, glinting in the leftover beer puddles on the tables. My head was still fuzzy from the 2 celebratory whiskeys for that new account, and all I wanted was my bed. So, the relief when my phone buzzed, "Your Uber driver, Cassian, is arriving," was immediate. I remember thinking, Cassian, interesting name. Rare. Didn't think anything of it beyond that at first. Just another late night, another ride home to my quiet apartment. I stumbled out onto the street, the cool night air hitting my face a little too hard. The car was a nondescript silver sedan, waiting at the curb. I tugged the door open, slid in, and mumbled my address before leaning my head against the cool window. The driver just nodded, a slight tilt of his head, eyes focused on the road ahead in the rearview mirror. His profile was... It caught my attention. Not in a bad way, just something. I tried to shake off the lingering fuzziness in my brain, but the image persisted. It was a familiar angle, a curve of the jawline that pinged some forgotten corner of my memory. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them again, forcing myself to really look. He was wearing a plain dark hoodie, the hood down, a baseball cap pulled low, shadowing most of his face. But that jaw, the way his earlobe stuck out ever so slightly at the bottom, the faint scar just beneath his right eye, it was all a little too much. My breath hitched without me even realizing it. I told myself it was the exhaustion, the whiskey, the general weirdness of the night. People look like other people all the time, right? It's a big world. He drove smoothly, quietly. No small talk, which I usually appreciated, but tonight, the silence felt heavy, suffocating. Every time he shifted his grip on the wheel or glanced briefly into the rearview mirror, my stomach did a little flip. There was this specific way he held his thumb, a slight bend in the knuckle that I hadn't thought about in years. But suddenly it was right there, vivid as anything. My mind started doing these rapid-fire comparisons almost involuntarily. His hands, the set of his shoulders, even the faint shadow of stubble on his chin. This couldn't be happening. It was impossible. Cassian was gone. He'd been gone for 16 years, vanished without a trace from our little town back when I was 21, and he was 15. My mother, Rosalind, and my father, Sterling, never stopped looking. Not really. They lived with that gaping hole, a constant, dull ache that shaped our entire family. Even me, the older brother who was supposed to look out for him. I had just tried to put it away, buried it deep so I could function. But here, in this dimly lit Uber, something was clawing its way back to the surface. I tried to tell myself I was crazy. Seriously, Alden, you're seeing ghosts. It's just a guy, an Uber driver. But the more I tried to push the thought away, the more it dug in. That scar. It wasn't just a scar, it was the scar. The one he got when he fell off his bike, trying to impress a girl. Slammed his face into the curb. I remembered cleaning it for him, all blood and tears, trying to make him laugh, even though I was pissed he was so reckless. My heart started doing this strange, fluttery rhythm. Not exactly pounding, more like a trapped bird beating its wings against a cage. This was more than just a passing resemblance. This was a punch to the gut. A cold dread that started to spread through my veins. The implications. The absolute, total impossibility of it all. I couldn't articulate it, even to myself. The car slowed, approaching my street, and I realized I had maybe 30 seconds to either confront this terrifying, impossible vision, or let him drive away forever. The car pulled up to the curb. My apartment building, mundane and familiar, suddenly looked like a distant shore. 30 seconds, maybe less. The driver turned off the engine, and the sudden quiet in the car was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the city. He didn't look at me, just stared straight ahead, a mirror of my own frozen state. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. I needed to say something, anything, but the words were stuck, tangled up with 16 years of silence and grief and suppressed memories. This wasn't just an Uber ride anymore. It was a ghost trying to materialize right in front of me. Cassian. My little brother. He was 6 years younger than me. We grew up in a place called Ashwood Creek, a small town nestled in the shadow of the Cascades. Not much happened there, which I guess made his vanishing all the more jarring. Our house was one of those old Victorians with a creaky porch and a huge maple tree in the front yard. Rosalind, our mom, was a kindergarten teacher, all warmth and structured chaos. Sterling, our dad, built custom furniture, quiet and steady, with hands that always smelled of sawdust and lemon polish. Cassian was a whirlwind, even as a kid, all energy and bright, curious eyes. He'd follow me everywhere, tagging along to the creek with my friends and bugging me to teach him how to skip rocks. I remember him, probably 5 or 6, trying to imitate my stride, his little legs working double time to keep up. I was always the protective big brother, even though sometimes he drove me absolutely nuts. He had this gap between his 2 front teeth, which made his grin totally mischievous. We'd spend hours exploring the woods behind our house, building forts, pretending we were intrepid explorers. I taught him how to fish in Silverstream Lake, how to change a bike tire, how to throw a decent fastball. That scar below his eye, that was from a scraped bike stunt gone wrong, like I remembered. As he hit his preteen years, things shifted, as they always do. He started finding his own friends, getting his own interests. He got into skateboarding, spending hours at the dilapidated skate park behind the old mill, coming home with new scrapes and an attitude that sometimes bordered on defiance. I was 21 by then, trying to navigate my own first real job in Seattle, only coming home on weekends or holidays. My life was starting, and his was still back in Ashwood Creek. I saw less of the wide-eyed kid and more of the moody teenager, which I guess I just chalked up to, being a teenager. Rosalind and Sterling notice it too, of course. He started pulling away, spending more time in his room with headphones on, or out with his new crowd. Not bad kids exactly, but definitely on the fringes of what you'd call respectable in Ashwood Creek. There was Marigold, a girl with bright pink hair who worked at the diner, and Kaylin, who had a beat-up pickup truck that always smelled faintly of something herbal. They weren't trouble, not overtly, but they were different from the kids Cassian had grown up with. I remember one Thanksgiving, Cassian barely spoke a word, just picked at his plate, then vanished upstairs. Rosalind looked worried, but Sterling just shrugged it off. He's finding himself, Rose. It's normal. I remember thinking the same thing, more or less. I just wasn't around enough to see the pattern. There were little things, missing curfew by an hour or 2, shrugging off questions about where he'd been. Once, Sterling found a small baggie of what looked like dried herbs, probably weed, tucked under Cassian's mattress. There was a huge argument, voices raised, doors slamming. Cassian swore it wasn't his, and that Kaylin must have dropped it when he was over. We all sort of believed him, or wanted to. We just wanted to believe he was still our Cassian. Just a bit rebellious. I was back in Seattle by then. Just got a text from Rosalind saying, Cassian had a rough night, but everything's fine now. I remember calling him, but he just grunted into the phone, said he was fine, nothing to worry about. I didn't push it. I had my own demanding job, my own fledgling independent life. I figured it was just teenage angst, a phase he'd grow out of. Maybe I was too busy with my own nascent career, too self-absorbed to notice the subtle cracks appearing. And now, sitting here in this car, the weight of those missed signs felt crushing. All those assumptions, those dismissals. Maybe if I'd paid closer attention, really seen him back then. But then, he was gone. Just gone. And now this. Are you Alden? He asked, his voice low, raspy, but definitely familiar. It was like a jolt, that voice. Not exactly what I remembered, deeper, but the intonation, that subtle lilt. My heart lurched, a sickening, heavy thud. He'd finally looked at me, just a quick flicker of his eyes in the rearview. They were the same startling blue. a color that always reminded me of the deep parts of Silverstream Lake. I swallowed hard. Yeah, and you're Cassian? The name felt like a foreign object on my tongue, full of 16 years of unasked questions. He stiffened, almost imperceptibly, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. He didn't answer right away. The air in the car thickened, making it hard to breathe. I could feel the blood thrumming behind my ears. This was it. The moment of truth. He finally turned slightly, just enough so I could see more of his profile. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "My name is Kian. You've got the wrong guy." He even had a slight stubble on his chin, just like I thought. The scar was there, right below his eye, a faint crescent. My mind raced, grabbing onto every detail. Kian? A variation? A cover? "No," I said, my voice shaky, but conviction finally breaking through the fear. "No, I don't. You're Cassian. My brother." I felt a desperate need to tear off the baseball cap, to see his full face, to confirm what every fiber of my being was screaming at me. He flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. But it was there. His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror again. And for a fleeting second, I saw something raw and startled in them. Then it was gone, replaced by a practiced blankness. "Listen, man," he said, pushing the words out with a forced calm. "I'm Kian. Your ride is over. Get out." His voice was harder now, a definite edge to it. He reached for the door handle, but I wasn't moving. "Cassian, what happened?" "Where have you been?" My voice cracked. This was everything. The years of silence, the funerals that never happened, the hollowed-out look in Rosalind's eyes. He sighed, a long, exasperated sound. "Look, I'm calling support." "You're harassing me." He pulled out his phone, holding it up. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I imagined a tearful reunion, maybe some anger, but not this cold, practiced denial. The absurdity of it all, sitting in an Uber, accusing the driver of being my long-lost brother, it was a dark comedy unfolding. Back then, the last time I saw him, it was a humid August day in Ashwood Creek, 2008. I was visiting from Seattle just for the weekend. Rosalind had made her famous peach cobbler, and the whole house smelled sweet. Cassian was restless, buzzing with an energy I couldn't quite place. He was 15 then, on the cusp of 16. He'd spent most of the day tinkering with Kaylin's old dirt bike in the backyard, getting grease all over his favorite band t-shirt. I remember teasing him about it, and he just flashed that mischievous, gap-toothed grin. Later that evening, after dinner, he told Rosalind and Sterling he was going to Marigold's place to work on a school project. "Just going to grab some notes, be back by 10, he'd said, swinging his backpack over his shoulder. I remember Sterling giving him a stern look. 10 sharp, young man. No dawdling. Cassian just rolled his eyes, gave a quick wave, and walked out the back door, heading down the gravel path towards the woods. He always took the shortcut through the woods to Marigold's. It cut a good 20 minutes off the walk. 10 o'clock came and went. Then 10:30. 11. Rosalind started pacing, checking her watch every few minutes, calling Marigold's landline, getting no answer. Sterling tried calling Cassian's flip phone, which only went straight to voicemail. At midnight, Sterling went out in his truck, driving the roads, checking the usual spots. Rosalind was a wreck, tears streaming down her face, muttering, "He's never done this, never." I tried to reassure her, telling her he probably just crashed at Marigold's, fell asleep. But a cold knot was forming in my stomach. The next morning, his bed hadn't been slept in. Marigold swore he never showed up at her house. Kaylin said he hadn't seen Cassian since earlier that afternoon. The backpack was gone, his skateboard, his worn-out sneakers. That's it. Nothing else. No note, no sign of struggle, no indication of where he'd gone. Just gone. The sheriff, a grizzled old man named Deputy Arlo, took a report, but he didn't seem to take it seriously at first. "Kids run off all the time," he'd said, which infuriated Sterling. Rosalind, though, she just knew. She paced for days, calling anyone and everyone, plastering missing flyers all over town, her face a mask of grief and determination. I spent that week back home, helping Sterling search the woods, walking the creek banks, calling out his name until my voice was raw. We found nothing, not a single trace. The town, small as it was, became a beehive of hushed rumors. Some thought he'd run away to Seattle, seeking excitement. Others whispered about foul play, though there was no evidence. The truth was, no one knew. And the silence that followed, the absence, became a permanent fixture in our lives. My own life, the one I'd built in Seattle, felt flimsy after that. I tried to focus on my job, a nascent career in software development. My best friend, a guy named Zephyr, who I'd met in college, tried to keep me distracted. He'd drag me out to Mariners games or to noisy pubs, telling me, "You can't let it consume you, Alden. You've got to live." But it was always there, a low hum of guilt and worry in the background. My girlfriend at the time, a sweet woman named Peregrine, tried to be supportive, but the shadow of Cassian's disappearance eventually strained our relationship to breaking point. How do you explain to someone that a part of you is just missing? How do you move on when you don't even know what happened? She tried, but eventually the weight was too much. We parted ways a year later, amicably enough, but I knew my inability to fully invest in our future, haunted by the past, was a major factor. Rosalind and Sterling became shells of their former selves. Rosalind stopped teaching. She just couldn't. She spent her days poring over missing persons websites, writing letters to obscure support groups. Sterling retreated into his workshop, burying himself in wood shavings. But I'd often find him just staring out of the window, his tools silent beside him. Their marriage, once so strong, became a fragile thing, held together by shared sorrow and unspoken blame. I visited them religiously every month, a pilgrimage of sorts, trying to fill the void, knowing I never could. We never mentioned Cassian by name after a while. It was just the absence. An elephant in every room. Now, sitting in this car, staring at the man who was undeniably my brother, the raw wound of all those years ripped open again. He was still holding his phone, pretending to call support. I had to try one more thing. "The scar, Cassian," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "From the bike. You hit the curb on Alder Street. I cleaned it for you. Told you not to be so reckless." His hand, hovering over his phone, froze. His shoulders slumped. Just a fraction. The carefully constructed mask of Keon wavered, then cracked. He slowly, very slowly lowered the phone. He didn't look at me, just stared through the windshield at nothing. The silence stretched, thick and painful, filled with 16 years of questions, finally daring to claw their way out. His breathing became shallower, uneven. He was trapped, and so was I. The city lights blurred outside the window, reflecting a kaleidoscope of unreality on the dashboard. This wasn't a phase, wasn't a mistake. This was him. And everything I thought I knew, everything I had meticulously buried, was about to explode. He finally turned his head, slowly, like a rusted gear grinding into motion. The baseball cap still shadowed his face, but now I could see the full curve of his jaw, the slight puffiness under his eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor in his lip. And those eyes, those startling blue eyes that had haunted my family for so long, were filled with a raw, desperate fear. My stomach tightened into a hard knot, a cold stone settling deep inside me. This wasn't the reunion I'd played out in my head 1,000 times. This was something else entirely. "Alden!" he rasped, his voice barely audible, like a whisper forced through a dry throat. The sound of my name, after all these years from his lips, sent a strange jolt through me. It was familiar yet alien. He pulled off the baseball cap, revealing a mop of dark, slightly unkempt hair, longer than he used to wear it. flecked with a few strands of gray I never expected to see on my little brother. He looked tired, worn, older than 31, which he would have been now. The gap in his front teeth was gone, probably fixed at some point. But it was him, no doubt now. The familiar angles of his face, the way his eyebrows arched slightly in the middle. My brother. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or just sit there in stunned silence. My mind was a whirlwind of images. Cassian as a kid, laughing, covered in dirt. Rosalind's tear-stained face, Sterling's quiet despair. And now this. All those years, all that pain, all the unanswered questions, suddenly compressed into this moment in a parked car on a quiet Seattle street. The hum of a faraway bus, the distant sirens, the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze, all of it registered acutely, yet felt utterly irrelevant. Cassian, what happened? I managed to choke out, the words thick with emotion. Where have you been? Mom and Dad, they never stopped looking. My voice broke on Mom and Dad. It was the cruelest part of it all, their endless, quiet suffering. He winced, turning his gaze back to the windshield. His hands were clasped tightly on the steering wheel, knuckles white. I couldn't. He paused, a long, agonizing silence stretching between us. I couldn't go back. Why? I demanded, a sudden surge of anger, hot and sharp, cutting through my shock. Why couldn't you? Do you have any idea what you put them through? What you put us through? The frustration, buried for years, was finally bubbling to the surface, acidic and raw. He shook his head, a small, jerky movement. It's complicated, Alden. More complicated than you know. His voice was flat, resigned. He was still trying to keep me at arm's length, trying to keep up the wall, even after I'd seen through it. Complicated? I echoed, my voice rising. What could possibly be so complicated that you let your family grieve you for 16 years? We thought you were dead, Cassian. Dead. The reality of his aliveness, while a relief, was also a fresh wound, a betrayal. He finally looked at me again. His blue eyes clouded with something I couldn't quite decipher. Shame? Regret? A deep, abiding weariness. I know, he whispered, his voice cracking this time. I know. And I'm so sorry. I truly am. He looked away, pinching the bridge of his nose. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I had to get out. I thought if I just disappeared, things would be better for everyone. Better? I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Better for who? Mom couldn't teach anymore. Dad became a ghost in his own workshop. Our family broke. Cassian. It shattered. The accusations tumbled out, raw and unedited, words I'd never thought I'd get to say to him. He visibly recoiled, as if I'd struck him. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around the small space of the car, anywhere but at me. I know. I heard things. Years ago, I didn't mean for it to go that far. I never did. He took a deep, shuddering breath. I was just a kid, Alden. A stupid, scared kid. A kid. Yes, he was. 15. But the consequences, they weren't just childish mistakes. They were tectonic shifts that fractured our world. My initial instinct to pull him into a hug, to weep with relief, was now warring with a burning fury. This was too much, too fast. The sheer audacity of him just reappearing as an Uber driver, no less. It was almost comical in its cruel irony. We need to talk, I said, my voice calmer now, the anger replaced by a cold, resolute determination. Not here. Not like this. We need to actually talk. You need to tell me everything. From the beginning, what happened the night you left. Why did you leave? Where have you been all this time? The questions poured out, a torrent that had been dammed for too long. He looked at me, his gaze finally settling, a flicker of something new in his eyes. Resignation, perhaps? Or maybe a tentative hint of relief that the dam had finally broken. The streetlight cast long shadows across his face, making him look even more gaunt. He let out a long, slow breath, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of all those lost years. Okay, Alden. Okay, but not tonight. I can't. Not tonight. Just give me a minute. He seemed utterly exhausted, as if the energy of 16 years of hiding had just drained out of him. The air in the car was still heavy, but now it felt less suffocating, more like the quiet before a storm that was about to break. And I knew with a chilling certainty that this was just the beginning. I didn't let him drive away. Not that night. I ended up just sitting there in the passenger seat of his car on my quiet street for what felt like an eternity. The city had mostly gone silent by then, just a few lingering night sounds. I pressed him gently at first, then more insistently. Cassian, you need to tell me something. Anything. I need to know you're okay, that you're not just going to vanish again. He finally, reluctantly, agreed to meet me the next day, at a diner far from my usual haunts, a place called the Crow's Nest near the waterfront. He was jumpy, kept looking over his shoulder. I got his number, a burner phone naturally, and watched him drive off, a strange mix of relief and utter terror swirling inside me. The next few days were a blur of restless sleep and frantic mental planning. How do you tell Rosalind and Sterling that their son, the one they mourned for so long, is not only alive, but has been driving an Uber in the same city as me? I couldn't just drop that bomb. I debated calling Zephyr my best friend. He'd known Cassian too back when, but this felt too monumental, too fragile. I needed to know the whole story first. Needed to understand what was going on. When we met at the Crow's Nest, Cassian was already there, hunched over a coffee, still wearing that same baseball cap, though he took it off when I sat down. He looked even more tired in the harsh morning light. I ordered a black coffee, mostly for something to do with my hands, my stomach too clenched to think about food. The diner was busy, clatter of plates and muffled conversations, which oddly felt like a good thing, a shield. He started talking, his voice low, almost mechanical at first, as if reciting a script. He said he'd run away that night because he was in over his head. Kalen, the kid with the pickup truck, had gotten involved with some older guys from out of town, some real rough types who were dealing more than just weed. Cassian had accidentally overheard something about a shipment, and then they'd threatened him, threatened his family. He was terrified. He thought if he just vanished, if he became a non-entity, they'd leave everyone alone. He'd taken some cash he'd saved from odd jobs, a little over $300, and hitched a ride with a trucker heading south. Ended up in Sacramento first, then drifting. He stayed off the grid mostly, cash jobs, never staying in one place for too long. He changed his name, first to Kay, then Kian, just to be safe. He'd heard, a few years back through some very indirect channels, that the guys Kalen was with had gone down, arrested in a sting operation. So he thought it was safe to finally settle. Landed in Seattle a year ago, started driving for the rideshare company. My mind reeled. This wasn't the simple runaway story I'd half expected. This was far heavier. Why didn't you go to the police, Cassian? Or tell us, I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He just shook his head, a hollow look in his eyes. I was 15, Alden. Scared out of my mind, and who would have believed me? These guys, they had ways, and they said if I ever told anyone, ever came back, they'd make sure Mom and Dad paid for it. He took a long sip of his coffee, his hands trembling slightly around the mug. I thought I was protecting you all. It was the only way I knew. My anger was still there, but it was now laced with something else. A crushing sorrow for the frightened kid he'd been, and a profound empathy for the life he'd had to build out of fear. He'd bounce between cities, never filing taxes, always under the radar. He had no real identification, no bank account beyond a Cash App linked to a fabricated identity, no credit history. He was, effectively, a ghost. The practical implications were staggering. He couldn't just walk back into life. He existed in a legal limbo. "So, you're keying now?" I asked, my voice flat. He nodded. "Yeah, been keying for years. It's who I am now." But his eyes, they were Cassian's. The way he hesitated, the slight catch in his breath, those were all Cassian. He couldn't just shed that skin. My brother was right here in front of me after all this time, but he was also a stranger, a collection of fears and secrets, and a life I knew nothing about. The conversation dragged on for hours, details emerging in fits and starts. His life had been hard. He'd slept in shelters, worked grueling manual labor jobs for cash, constantly looking over his shoulder. He'd made mistakes, he admitted, some bad choices, but he'd always tried to stay out of real trouble, tried to just survive. He had no permanent address, lived mostly out of his car or rented cheap rooms by the week. He was living paycheck to paycheck, barely. He was free from those guys, yes, but he was still trapped, just in a different kind of prison. And now, the biggest problem loomed: what to do about Rosalind and Sterling. The weight of that decision, the potential chaos it would unleash, felt heavier than any single thing I'd ever faced. It's been 3 months since that night. 3 months of navigating this impossible, surreal reality. We haven't told Rosalind and Sterling yet. How do you prepare a mother for a resurrection, and then for the story of why her son stayed dead to her for so long? It feels like an act of cruelty, no matter how carefully we plan it. Cassian, or Kian as he still insists on being called in public, comes to my apartment a couple of times a week. We talk. He tells me more pieces of his fractured past, and I try to piece together the boy I knew with the man who sits across from me, sipping cheap coffee, his eyes still holding that guarded, distant look. I've started trying to help him untangle the legal mess of his existence. It's a slow, agonizing process. No birth certificate, no social security number, not in his name anyway. We're talking to a lawyer recommended by Zephyr, a specialist in identity issues, but even she's shaking her head at the complexity of it all. It's going to take years, and a lot of money I barely have, to get him officially recognized, to give him a real identity. He's still driving for the rideshare company, using that fake ID he's had for years, but the stress is getting to him. Every time he gets a ping for a ride, I see the tension in his shoulders. My relationship with Rosalind and Sterling is strained by my secret. I visit them, try to act normal, but holding back such monumental news feels like a physical weight, a lie I'm living every day. I catch myself looking at Rosalind, imagining her face when she sees him, and my stomach twists. Sterling, too. The joy, the relief, the pain, the anger. It'll be a storm. I don't know if their hearts, already so scarred, can take it. What I've learned from all this, it's a lot. I guess I learned that grief isn't always about death. It's about absence. And that some absences, even if the person is alive, can be just as devastating. I also learned how easily a life can be derailed. How one terrified decision by a 15-year-old can snowball into a decade and a half of hiding, isolation, and legal non-existence. I used to think I understood resilience, but seeing Cassian, what he's been through and how he's just survived, puts everything into perspective. My future plans are currently on hold. How do you plan a life when you're orchestrating the re-entry of a ghost into the world? My dating life? Non-existent. My career feels like background noise. It's all about Cassian now. My priority. I'm exhausted, emotionally drained, and constantly teetering on the edge of a breakdown. But I can't stop. I won't. I'm sharing this here because I don't know who else to tell. Zephyr knows I'm helping someone, but not the full extent. It's too much for him, or maybe I'm just not ready to burden him with it all. I feel like I'm walking a tightrope, and one wrong step could send everything crashing down. I need outside perspective, I guess. Has anyone ever dealt with something like this? How do you even begin to tell your parents their son, presumed dead, is actually alive, but an undocumented ghost? And how do you deal with the anger, the betrayal, the relief, all mixed into one impossible knot? I'm just trying to figure out the next step, one foot in front of the other, hoping I don't break something else along the way.